Hey, what's up, Spencer? My name is everybody, and welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to be talking about the book Run, Rose, Run, which is a country thriller written by James Patterson and Dolly Parton. Now, this video is going to be kind of making fun of this book, so if this is your favorite book, which it might be, I was actually really surprised with how high the ratings for this book was. If this is your favorite book and you're not somebody who can really handle somebody criticizing your favorite book, then maybe this isn't the video for you and maybe you should click away now. Please don't leave angry comments for me just because I personally didn't really enjoy this book. People can dislike something but still also find it fun and entertaining and want to interact with it and stuff like that. And I don't think that they should necessarily receive hate for that, because that's kind of where I am with making this video. A lot of times people put things on a scale, an X scale of like to dislike, whereas I like to add in like a Y scale to it where I can dislike something, but it can also still be entertaining and fun and want to be something that I want to do something with. And that's kind of what this video is. I didn't like this book, but I still found it fun and entertaining enough that I wanted to make this video and share it with you guys and have us all kind of have a fun time with it, you know? So with that, let's just jump right in. So this book actually starts out in the middle of the action in this crazy scene where this woman is running across a hotel room and then she just throws herself out a fourth-story balcony before we cut to 11 months earlier. Bum, bum, bum. And this is the point where we are going to meet our main character, Annie Lee Keys. The thing that you really need to know about Annie Lee is that she really wants to be a country music star and that all the time she is writing songs and coming up with lyrics and doing all sorts of stuff like that. But she is also really down on her luck. She has literally nothing. She is homeless. She doesn't have any money. She had to sell her guitar so that she could try and like get a couple of bucks. And now she is at a truck stop looking for a ride so that she can go to Kansas City. I think. I don't remember where we're going, but her goal is to get to a like country music city so that she can try and start working towards her goal of becoming a famous country musician. So she meets this guy. He seems nice enough. She hitches a ride with him, falls asleep in the cab of his truck. And when she wakes up, his hand is on her knee. Ugh. And then we get some badass Annie Lee Keys. "I'm warning you," she said. Eddie practically giggled at her. "What are you gonna do, girl? Scream?" "No," she said. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out the gun. Then she pointed it at his chest. "I'm going to do this." Eddie's hand shot off her leg so fast she would have laughed if she weren't so outraged. Yes, queen. I really wish that we get more badass Annie Lee throughout the rest of this book, but unfortunately, this is kind of like the extent of it. This is the most of it. I hate that this is the most of it because it would have been cool for her to really be able to pull this kind of shit throughout the rest of the book. She does end up stealing this guy's truck, though. She kicks him out on the side of the road and then drives it all the way to Kansas City or wherever we're going before she ends up abandoning it. So at this point in the book, we are introduced to our two other main characters. The chapters kind of jump around from point of view. We get Annie Lee. And then we also get our next character, Ruth Anna Ryder. And the only thing that you really need to know about Ruth Anna Ryder is that she is a hardcore Dolly Parton self-insert. She is a retired famous country musician who is beloved by everybody, and everybody is constantly trying to get her to do like one last performance. And Dolly Parton actually reads the chapters that are from Ruth Ann Ryder's point of view, which is kind of makes it so that you can really feel how self-insert he is. And then our other main character is Ethan Blake, who is obviously going to turn into our main character love interest. Ethan works as a musician for Ruth Anna because even though she's retired, she still likes to make music and kind of like do her own thing. She just doesn't release the music. She just keeps it to herself. And so Ethan works I don't know what instrument he really plays for this band. I think maybe he also plays the guitar, but he works in this band at her house every day. And he also sometimes does like handyman shit for her. And for right now, that's all that you really need to know about these guys. So, jumping back to Annie Lee, she is now going from bar to bar, trying to convince people to let her play at the bar so that she can start getting recognized, people can start hearing her stuff, she can start getting known. She's not really having any luck until she gets to the Cat's Paw Saloon and she meets this guy named Billy. He's the bartender there and he lets her have a slot. Now, I want to remind you, Annie Lee has no guitar because she had to sell it. So once she convinces this guy to give her a slot, she also has to be like, hey, you got a guitar that I can borrow? And somehow Billy does actually have an extra guitar laying around and is just totally fine with the fact that this person begged him for a slot and then is not prepared for that slot in any way whatsoever. This is just so funny to me. Can you imagine doing this for like literally any other job? Like, I want to be a published author one day. Can you imagine me like going around and begging publishing houses to publish my work, and then finally somebody like signs me on and I go, great. By the way, do you got a book I can publish? Anyway, Annie Lee gets her guitar. She goes up on stage and she starts playing, and she is so good that she almost immediately develops this like cult-like following. Well, I'd be honored, Annie Lee said. She'd played just 4 of her own songs and then, figuring she shouldn't wear out her new Nashville welcome. Oh, I guess that's where we are. We're in Nashville. We're not in Kansas City. Figuring she shouldn't wear out her new Nashville welcome, she tucked that old bar guitar under her arm and headed off stage. That was when the Cat's Paw regulars started stomping their feet on the floor and Billy began waving madly at her from over by the beer tap, shouting, "Stay up there, girl, go on!" For a moment, she stood there, frozen in the bright light, truly doubting this moment was real. She'd imagined a night like this for so long that suddenly she was afraid she'd conjured it up, straight out of her wild and grandiose imagination. Maybe she was dreaming as she slept on a park bench somewhere. Or maybe she'd flipped that big dumb semi into a ditch, and the Cat's Paw Saloon was just a hospital bed hallucination no realer than a young girl's secret, most heartfelt wish. Is it easy? Someone shouted. No, it ain't. So those words reference an original song that Annie Lee sung because that's how incredibly amazing she is. She didn't even do any covers. She went on stage, sang 4 of her own original songs, and it was just so good, and everybody is just already so enamored with her that they need more immediately right now. And this theme of way too easy is going to persist throughout the book because Dolly Parton and James Patterson will try and give Annie Lee conflict and problems by like making her homeless and stuff like that at the start of the book, but everybody just ends up giving her what she wants and what she needs so quickly. Like, nobody ever tells her no, so it doesn't really feel like she has any conflict or true adversity because it's not like she ever fails in any way throughout this book. It's really amazing and almost ridiculous how everything just falls into Annie's Lee lap throughout the 400 whatever page is this book is. So once Annie Lee like actually finishes her set and goes over to the bar, she ends up meeting love interest Ethan Blake for the first time, and he tells her, whoa, how amazing she is. And she basically just tells him to fuck off. You know, she's not really interested in friends. She's not really interested in dating. She just wants to focus on her music career, which would be like an admirable character trait, except for the fact that literally the first person that she meets and hits on her is love interest Ethan Blake. She's going to end up getting with this man eventually, so it doesn't feel like that's a true sentiment for her. So as soon as Annie Lee leaves the bar, Ethan Blake basically immediately calls Ruth Anna to tell her how incredible Annie Lee is. And because Ruth Anna has not yet met Annie Lee, she has not fallen for the Annie Lee spell. So she like calls Ethan Blake out on his bullshit. So I saw an amazing new singer last night, he said. Ruth Anna gave Maya the side eye, and Maya giggled into her fist. Ethan braced himself for the ribbing he could tell was coming. So, Blake, Ruth Anna said, what was so amazing? Her face or her boobs? How do you know the singer was a girl? Ethan asked, his mouth full of apple. Because I'm not dumb, Ruth Anna said. Fine, he said. But give me a little credit, why don't you? It was her voice. Oh, so fun fact, not only does Dolly Parton narrate all of the Ruth Anna point of view chapters, but there is apparently also a playlist that goes along with this book. I didn't listen to it. You don't read a playlist. I didn't listen to this playlist because I'm not really like a country music fan, so I wasn't interested in listening to it. But I do really wish that they had decided to put in actual time and effort into the music that was in the audiobook. Because there are quite a few sections in which Annie Lee is like singing, and we have her lyrics, and then the narrator is just kind of really doing that like sing reading thing that narrators do when they read song lyrics. And being that this is Dolly Parton's book and she was a part of this, I kind of really wish that she had given them some direction and had them, told them kind of like a little more of a melody to follow so that it did sound more like a song. They didn't have, I don't expect them to be like actual musicians because they're narrators, they're not singers and stuff like that. But I wish that there had been a little more of an effort in the actual like song lyrics singing part of the audiobook, I guess. I don't know if that's just like too high of an expectation on my end, but I know that there are some really, really high quality audiobooks out there nowadays, such as Sadie, for example, where it really does sound like you're listening to a podcast. And so I don't know, this being made with an actual country musician, like I just wish that there had been a little bit more effort there. But I digress. Let's get back to the actual plot of this book. So Annie Lee keeps playing at the Cat's Paw Saloon, and right now she's just kind of like working for free food, which means that she doesn't have any money to pay for a motel room or anything like that. So she's sleeping outside. And one morning she actually gets caught by the police. And even though she acts like super suspicious, they just let her go. You spend the night here? The man interrupted. He stood with his legs spread wide and his thumbs tucked into his belt. Well, Annie Lee said, wasn't it obvious? Sleeping in the park is illegal, he said. The woman took a step closer to her. She had a cup of steaming coffee, and it smelled so good and warm that it nearly brought tears to Annie Lee's eyes. There's a shelter on Lafayette Street, she said gently. The rescue mission. Are you familiar with it? Okay, sure, Annie Lee said, taking a corresponding step backward. She saw the other cop scanning the ground, probably looking for needles or bottles of cheap liquor. I don't do drugs, she blurted, and then flushed. I'm not from here, she added, but that was probably obvious, too. Are you okay? The woman asked. Do you need help? Yes, Annie Lee said. No, I mean, I'm just fine. I'll be moving along, I guess, if that's okay with you. She took another small step away from them. The cops looked at each other. They clearly didn't consider her a threat to herself or others, and when they turned back to her, she gave them a little wave. She'd take their silence as permission to get the hell out of there. Thanks, and, have fun patrolling, she said. Then she hurried away, holding her breath until she was safely out of sight. They didn't call after her. This is your lucky day, kid, she said to herself, and then she tried very hard to believe it. That was way too easy. Like, she didn't even get a, oh, we better not catch you sleeping here again or we'll arrest you next time, like, warning or anything like that. Like, I don't know. At this point, Ethan has somehow convinced Ruth Anna to come to the Cat's Paw and listen to Annie Lee, even though Ruth Anna never goes out. And she really thinks that Annie Lee is gonna suck. I guess she just does it to like get Ethan to like shut the fuck up about this girl or something. But of course, as soon as Ruth Anna here's Annie Lee. She's like, wow, this girl is so amazing. I have to talk to her immediately. However, Ruth Anna doesn't end up saying to Annie Lee what you might expect somebody who has fallen under Annie Lee's spell to say. Here's my advice for you, Annie Lee Keys, she said. Get the hell out of Nashville while you still can. Annie Lee swallowed. Pardon me? She gasped. It's a hard, rough business, said Ruth Anna. A tiny thing like you'll get chewed up and spit out like a hunk of gristle. Sure, you might taste success, but you're more likely to end up broken alone. Do something sensible with your life, Annie Lee. Get a job. Find a man and marry him. She looked over at Ethan Blake. Take this guy, for example. He'd make someone a real nice husband. Steeling herself, she spoke slowly and calmly to her idol. I admire you more than anyone else in this whole green earth, Annie Lee said. But with all due respect, Miss Ryder, you can go screw yourself. You know, maybe I was a little bit wrong when I said that we didn't get any more badass Annie Lee, because it is kind of bitchin' to tell your idol to go and fuck themselves. Anyway, because everything always perfectly works out for Annie Lee every time, Ruth Anna is just so amazed by Annie Lee's tenacity and flips her viewpoint around 180 degrees and is like, you know what, Annie Lee? I will help you become a famous country musician, even though I 5 seconds ago was just telling yourself to do the most heteronormative fucking bullshit out there. Not only does Ruth Anna agree to help Annie Lee become a famous musician, but she then takes Annie Lee home with her to her giant mansion and gives Annie Lee some of her dead daughter's clothes and lets her sleep in her dead daughter's bed. That's weird. I assume that rich people usually have like 17 bedrooms in their houses, you know, or at least a single guest room. Wouldn't a rich person have more than 2 bedrooms in their house? Why is she letting Annie Lee live and sleep in her dead daughter's room? There's a lot of psychological shit that you can read into with this entire thing. But when Ruth Anna wakes up in the morning, she actually finds that Annie Lee has already left, and she has left this note being like, thank you so much, Miss Ryder, for everything that you've done for me, but I gotta go off and kind of like do my own thing. I can't live with you. I gotta be my own person. And seeing as I don't have my own guitar, I just found this random guitar in the back of a closet and I took it. I figured you wouldn't mind. Anyway, bye. That is so crazy that she did that, girl. Wait, you can't just take somebody's guitar. You don't know anything about it. Like, I know that you found it in the back of a closet, but that doesn't mean anything. That guitar could have like so much sentimental value. What if that's her dead daughter's guitar? And that's why it's in the back of the closet, is because it means so much, but Ruth Anna can't bring herself to look at it anymore. Or just knowing rich people and how they just drop so much money on shit, even though this guitar is just sitting in the back of somebody's closet, like it's probably worth like $50,000 or something like that. Like, I can't, why would you take that? That is how you are definitely going to get the cops called on your ass. But it doesn't matter though. Of course, Ruth Anna is fine with it because nobody, who cares? Annie Lee can just do whatever the fuck she wants, I guess. And now that she has her own guitar, Annie Lee is like, I don't need to keep borrowing the guitar from the Cat's Paw. I can start going to other bars and branching out and trying to get other people to listen to my music and do that. So that's what she does. She goes to a new bar and she plays there. And then people are immediately obsessed with her again. And It's confusing the way that people treat her, because if I was at a bar and I saw people treating the live musician there like this, I would be very confused. When she'd finished the song and the sound of the final E chord had faded into the background noise, she thought the Charlie Daniels fan would move along on his personal errand, because she literally had to force this man to stand here and listen to her sing, and yet he's still obsessed with her for some reason. But he stayed there, peering at her curiously, as if she were some kind of rare bird. "I never heard it sung like that before," he said. "Can you do 'On the Road Again'?" "I sure can," she said. "Spider," he called over his shoulder, "come check this girl out." "Woman," Annie Lee muttered under her breath. Then an extremely large man in an extremely large cowboy hat, Spider, Annie Lee assumed, strode over to hear her version of Willie's Ode to Being on Tour, and pretty soon a whole cluster of people had gathered around her stool. Spider wanted her to sing Two Doors Down next, and she'd barely gotten the last line out before everyone started calling out more requests from the jukebox lineup. A very young couple with their arms around each other's waist asked if she could play their wedding song. Finally, she had to put the guitar aside and stand up. Her legs were cramped and her fingertips felt blistered and raw. "I'm sorry," she said to everyone. "I think I might be done for the night." They began to boo loudly but playfully, and then Ingrid, the bartender, appeared and wagged her finger at all of them like a tattooed Viking den mother. I'm sorry, maybe this is just me, because I really don't ever go out drinking. I don't go to bars. But I would think in a place that frequently has a lot of live music playing at a large variety of bars. Any bar that you go to in Nashville, I would assume, probably has some sort of live music going. If you heard this person playing and you really liked what they were doing, you'd probably just turn to your friend and be like, "Oh, this person's really good," right? You wouldn't like go up and like crowd around them and like have this whole entire like relationship with them. Like at most, you would probably like pull $1 out of your wallet and go and put it in the tip jar and be like, "Hey, good job, man." But besides that, I don't know. Maybe this is purely just a me thing. Let me know in the comments down below. Do people get this invested in the live musicians who come and play at bars and stuff? Why is everybody so obsessed with this girl immediately? I don't get it. Especially because now Annie Lee is like going to Ruth Anna's house every day to start working on her music and recording stuff. And Ruth Anna is starting to pull strings to help Annie Lee out. And now it's starting to move out of the territory of feeling like Annie Lee is achieving her dreams into it feels like she's becoming an industry plant. And at this point, you might be thinking, Spencer, isn't this book supposed to be a thriller? Wasn't that like the whole, this is a country thriller? Where is the thrilling part? And you're right, we haven't had anything thrilling happen so far yet. But this is where things kind of start to get a little bit thrilling. One night when Annie Lee is walking home from the bar, she gets chased down by a guy, although she like never sees him or anything like that. She just like feels him and knows he's there and knows that he intends her harm and stuff like that. And she just somehow like intuits all of this stuff, which feels a little bit weird until a couple of scenes later, when now that she's making more money playing more consistently at bars, she does have enough money to pay for a motel room. So a couple of scenes later, she's actually getting out of the shower and two men are in her hotel room and they attack her and beat her up. And while they're beating her up, they're telling her that, like, "Oh, this is to teach you a lesson," and, like, "This is the price for breaking the rules," and, like, all sorts of stuff. And when she goes and sees Ruth Anna the next day, Annie Lee just kind of tells her that she got mugged on the way home, which is why she was beaten up. She doesn't tell Ruth Anna that, like, these men were in her hotel room, because then that would elicit questions about Annie Lee's backstory, and we can't have that. But Ruth Anna is still concerned enough about Annie Lee that she goes to Ethan and asks Ethan to kind of like low-key be Annie Lee's bodyguard. They can't like explicitly be Annie Lee's bodyguard because Annie Lee is a strong, independent woman who doesn't need no man. So instead, we're going to have this man stalk her, and that'll definitely make her feel safer, is having some guy driving around and stalking her instead of explicitly telling her what his intentions are. So remember like 2 minutes ago when I said that Annie Lee is becoming an industry plant? And now it's starting to move out of the territory of feeling like Annie Lee is achieving her dreams into it feels like she's becoming an industry plant. See, I did say that. Well, Ruth Anna gets Annie Lee to write one song, like not even a demo tape or like a couple songs. She writes one song and they send it out to some guy. And now Annie Lee has a meeting with this guy. I don't know what his job is, whether he is a producer or what, but he tells Annie Lee that he isn't going to work with her unless she does a little something something for him, if you know what I mean. You know, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And Annie Lee very firmly says no. And this guy is so impressed by her quirky and not like other girliness that he decides to work with her anyway. Aaron Price slid closer to her on the couch. "Maybe we should go to dinner tonight and talk about it," he said. "You're a smart girl, I can tell. You know it pays to have powerful friends, don't you? What do you say? I'll have my assistant book us a table at Etch." She stood up and walked to the other side of his office, just in case he'd been thinking about putting a hand on her knee. "I'll let you just listen to my song," she said, "and then you'll be the one expressing gratitude because it'll be the best dang thing your station has played in months." She gazed at him defiantly, and he stared back at her in surprise. Then Aaron Price blinked. "Huh," he said almost to himself. "Huh." It seemed as if he were about to say more, but instead he went over to his computer and clicked on the WAV file Maya had sent him earlier. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. Aaron Price smiled at her in a totally new way. He didn't look sleazy. He looked thrilled. "Hell yes, I'm gonna play it," he said, "just about every hour for the next week." Do you see what I mean when I say that everything is coming way too easily for Annie Lee? Her singing and songwriting is so amazing that this one song overcame misogyny in this attempted essay. It doesn't matter that this guy has probably pulled the same thing with who knows how many other girls. Annie Lee is just so unique and so different and so amazing that she still gets to sing her songs anyway. Not only that, but her song is played on the radio so much and gets popular on the radio so much that even other characters start to be like, "Wow, Annie Lee, this is strange. I've never seen somebody get famous so fast before. Like this sure is a thing." And like maybe that should tell you that you're not giving your characters enough adversity or like true conflict, is even characters in the story are starting to comment on how strange it is that things are coming so easily to the main character. Like I don't know. Kind of seems to me like something is happening here. So at this point, Annie Lee has gotten close enough to Ruth Anna that we get to unlock a bit of Ruth Anna's backstory and we learn about what happened to her dead daughter. It's a pretty simple, straightforward thing. Essentially, Ruth Anna's daughter grew up in the spotlight, and because of that, that kind of made her very troubled. She had some mental health issues and she ended up taking her own life. And Ruth Anna feels like she doesn't want the same thing to happen to Annie Lee. You know, she thinks that she is a very sweet girl. She sees her daughter in Annie Lee, and thus she just wants Annie Lee to have this nice life instead of going and doing all of this famous stuff, which I mean, makes sense, except for the fact that Ruth Anna is actively the person who is making it so that Annie Lee like can become famous and stuff. So like, why isn't Ruth Anna kind of like the villain in this story where Annie Lee is kind of like having all she's going out and having all of these successes and Ruth Anna is trying to work like so hard to stop her, and this is why is because she really just doesn't want the same thing to I don't know. There's no conflict, there's no villain, there's no bad. There needs to be more bad, not enough bad. So after this, Annie Lee is at the cat's paw, and for some reason she decides to like go out behind, even though she knows that there's like people who are going to beat her up. She's like fully aware of this, and yet she decides to go into this back alley by herself. And wow, what do you know? She gets beat up. But love interest Ethan Blake jumps in and is able to save her. He hasn't really been around much until now, has he? Ruth Anna freaks out about this whole entire thing. She doesn't know what's going on, but she wants to keep Annie Lee safe. And so in order to do that, she sends Annie Lee and Ethan to New York City so that they can meet with a record label and producers. And yes, I know that these are actually producers this time. Last guy had no idea what his job was. I know that these people are producers because of what happens with the whole situation. So essentially, they offer her a record deal. You know, they think that she got good shit because, of course, they do. And Annie Lee is like, yeah, sure, I'll sign on with you guys, but I want to have the ability to write all the songs and produce everything and just have like full control over what's happening with my music. I don't really want other people to have any influence on it. I just want it to be all me. And the producers are like, no, you can't do like that. That's our job, is to produce the music. So like that's the whole reason why you're signing with us, is because our job is to produce it. You make the music, but we produce it. And Annie Lee is like, well, if I don't get to do everything, then I don't want to do nothing. And she storms out, and she has to go back to Ruth Anna and tell her about how she completely I'm just kidding. Of course, she doesn't fail. She storms out, and they send somebody running after her to be like, oh, Annie Lee, it's no, come back, please. We will let you do whatever you want because you are just so amazing and so incredible that we couldn't possibly live without your music. And she just gets to do whatever she wants. Annie Lee like starts putting out music like onto the radio, and even though it's not professionally recorded, they record it in Ruth Anna's basement, and they don't do anything to like clean it up and stuff like that. She doesn't have any social media. They constantly talk about this, about how Annie Lee has no social media. She has no demos. She has nothing. She knows nothing about social media. And yet she gets so popular so quickly that people are now writing articles about her, comparing her to being the next Taylor Swift. Yeah, I'm not a Swiftie, but even I know that is a completely ridiculous claim to make. You can't make a claim like that lightly. Also, Taylor Swift is also an industry plant, so maybe you don't want to be making. Look at this. I said Annie Lee was becoming an industry plant, and I was right. And in case you don't know what an industry plant is, basically what's happening to Annie Lee is what an industry plant is somebody who just really gets everything given to them as opposed to them having like genuine talent. I know we're trying to make it seem like Annie Lee has genuine talent, but it's weird that she's never had any criticism or anybody like not like her. It's not possible to have everybody like your stuff all the time. No matter how good you are, there are going to be people out there who hate the stuff that you make. And it's weird that Annie Lee never meets a hater. She's never encountered anybody who's like, it's okay. Like, it just doesn't exist in this world somehow. So at this point in the book, we're about halfway through. and Annie Lee and Ethan are getting closer, or they're supposed to be getting closer, except for the fact that Ethan starts to realize that Annie Lee actually hasn't been telling him jack shit, because they meet up with a journalist and Annie Lee is getting interviewed, and she ends up telling this journalist kind of some stuff about her childhood and her backstory. And Ethan is realizing, like, holy shit, like, we're falling in love, and yet I didn't know any of this stuff. And yet you'll tell like this random ass journalist about the backwoods that you grew up in and stuff like that. Like, I can't believe this. Like, how dare you do this to me? So they get into a really big fight about it. And as they are driving home, they start to get chased by a car. They're getting tailgated. They get into this high speed vroom vroom chase, and Ethan uses his tactical military knowledge to tactically evade, because of course Ethan is ex-military. Are you allowed to be a male love interest in a romance book if you're not ex-military? Of course not. Only ex-military men are allowed to be love interests in romance books. But once they evade everything, once they get away, Ethan is like, Annie Lee, what the fuck is going on? You gotta tell me. And Annie Lee is still like refusing to tell him what is going on. And he gets so mad at her that he decides to leave her on the side of the road and go home. Love interest, Ethan Blake, who has just gone through a situation that shows that there are people that are actively trying to murder the woman that he's in love with, is mad that he doesn't get deets, and thus she almost just got killed like not even 3 minutes ago, and he's going to leave her on the side of the road for these killers to find her. What? And you might think that he does the thing where he like drives off a little bit down the road, and then he like kind of comes to his senses and realizes like, oh, this is a really shitty thing that I'm doing. I need to turn around and go and pick her up. Nope. Doesn't do that. He goes home, and he doesn't even find out until days later that Annie Lee made it home safe. Okay. This is love interest Ethan Blake, and yet he doesn't care about our what are our standards for our men in these books? I keep on seeing like girlies on Book Talk being like, ooh, men should read these romance novels. And then this I'm saying this isn't a romance novel, this is a thriller, but still he's the love interest, you know? Oh, men should read these books that are written by women for women, and then just act like the men in the... No, you shouldn't. You absolutely should. Please do not do this. If you know that the person, even if you don't like them, if you know that somebody is getting like actively followed and pursued and going to be killed, don't leave them on the side of the road where anybody can find them and pick them up. Ah! So Annie Lee is starting to get so popular with her music that she is getting booked to actually do opening gigs for well-known musicians. So she ends up getting booked for a gig with some guy named Kip Hart. He isn't a real person. He's some big name music guy in this world. So Annie Lee goes to do the show, does her whole performance and stuff, you know, does amazing. Everybody loves it because that's all that she does. But at the end, she gets called up by her record label, and she is in a whole bunch of trouble. And you guys want to know what the trouble is? You want to know what the issue, what the problem, why people are now angry at her? Apparently, Annie Lee performed so well at this concert that Kip Hart was upstaged by her, and he couldn't go on and he couldn't play because she just did so good. Now, I know that what they're trying to do here with this scene is talk about how a lot of the time, men can be really intimidated by successful women. It's a conversation that is actually like had throughout the book, and Ruth Anna like brings it up a lot, how hard it is to be a female country musician and how they are treated frequently. She brings up this whole like analogy called the salad and stuff, where they would say that like, oh, you could have like 90% male musicians and then 10% female musicians, whereas the male musicians are the leaf, the lettuce, and then the female musicians are tomatoes that you just sprinkle in the salad, which I guess I understand the analogy, but for me, I was like, why would you want like 90, why would you, nobody likes lettuce, like nobody wants just like a bowl of lettuce, like that's not fun. People like the adding, so I guess this is a good analogy, because in reality diversity is good, and that's how you have a fun and interesting and delicious salad. If you just have a bowl that's boring, nobody wants just a bowl of lettuce. But anyway, getting back to it, they're trying to say that men can be really intimidated by successful women, which is totally a true thing. It definitely is very hard to be a female musician in the country music scene. I absolutely believe that like Dolly Parton is pulling like real world shit when we're talking about this stuff. However, because all of these men keep on just handing things to Annie Lee, her getting in trouble for being so good just feels like another one of those things of being like, really Annie Lee is just so amazing. That's the conflict, is that she's so amazing that it's creating problems that come on, it feels stupid and dumb, and it makes me angry. Give her real adversity. Like, if these men were really intimidated by Annie Lee being so strong, then they wouldn't be giving her all of this stuff. It would be the opposite. She would be being blacklisted. That guy who she like turned down and said that she wasn't going to sleep with him, he just like needed to play her song on the radio, and then he would be the one who was grateful. A man who was intimidated by what would never take that. They would be like, no, get the fuck out of my office. I ain't playing your shit on the radio if you ain't gonna suck my dick. Like, that's how it actually works. She would be getting blacklisted from all of these companies, and that would be true conflict, and that would truly show how sexism works in these things, is that if all of these men were barring her from getting to these places because she isn't acting in the way they want her to act, then that would be real and good. But that's not what happens. She just keeps on being defiant and yet getting whatever she wants anyway, which is not how it works in the real world. It almost feels a little bit, I don't want to say that it feels victim blaming, but it kind of feels like, oh, well, if women were just stronger and they just actually said no when men like hit on them, then they would get to the places that they needed to be. Like, I don't know. We're not really saying the things that need to fully be said here. We're trying, not making it though. So at this point, Annie Lee and Ethan have kind of like rekindled their relationship, and they are going on tour together because, hey, Annie Lee gets everything, even though she's super fucked up at that Kip Hart concert, apparently. Doesn't matter. She still gets to go on tour, travel around, get a whole bunch of people to watch her sing and shit. And one night in their hotel room, Ethan gets kind of drunk, and he tells Annie Lee some of his backstory, which is that when he was in the military a few years ago, he had a wife. And while he was overseas serving, his wife cheated on him. And a few days after he came home and he discovered the infidelity, his wife ended up getting murdered. And Ethan was arrested and he was in prison, jail. I know there's a difference. Don't remember what it is. I need to look it up. He was held in custody for 6 months while he waited to go on trial that eventually acquitted him and proved him that he didn't do it. I don't think that they ever say who killed Ethan's wife. And I don't think that Ethan super cares. It doesn't seem like he cares about trying to find out who killed his wife. He only seems to care that people know that he didn't do it, which is a little sus for me. Like I understand, but also like you don't care that somebody murdered your wife. Like she was cheating on you, but that was your wife. You don't give a fuck that somebody murdered her. Like it was probably the other guy, wasn't it? I don't know. Anyway, do you want to know what Annie Lee's response is to learning that Ethan didn't kill his wife and that he spent all this time in jail being accused of killing his wife? She just turns to him and goes, "Yeah, I know. Ruth Anna told me." Huh? What are when did this happen? If you're confused, you should be, because guess what? We, as the readers, were not present for whenever, apparently, Ruth Anna told Annie Lee that Ethan killed or didn't kill his wife. I want to know more why Ruth Anna told Annie Lee about this. That isn't her business to be going around and telling people about. There were several times throughout this book in which it feels as though it wasn't properly edited. There were times in which characters are replying to questions that weren't asked. When I was listening to the audiobook, sometimes I would feel as though it had accidentally like skipped forward a whole entire page. And I think that might be what's happening here. I think there might have been additional scenes that had previously been written and then cut, but then nobody actually took the time to actually read through the book one more time and make sure that everything like made sense and flowed properly. So I think we did previously have a scene where Ruth Anna told Annie Lee about this, but it was then cut and nobody ever rewrote this scene to make it make more sense and have it so that like this is Annie Lee learning about it for the first. I don't know. That's my theory. But anyway, Annie Lee does reveal some background information in response to Ethan sharing this. And she does tell about her stepdad and two younger half-sisters that she has. And in the next scene, we have caught up with the prologue. Do you guys remember the prologue? Yeah, we've caught up with the prologue, finally, where Annie Lee is getting ready for one of her shows. And again, a man shows up and attacks her. And for some reason, she decides that the best course of action, the best way to get away from this man is to throw herself off the fourth-story balcony and through a glass ceiling and hope that she survives. And of course she survives, and not only survives, but she survives with no injury? Ethan retreated to the far wall while the woman, her name tag said Patience, checked Annie Lee's blood pressure and pulse and then shone a flashlight into her eyes. "Looking good," she said. "You play the lotto." "Never," Annie Lee said. "Why?" "Because I never heard of anyone surviving a 4-story fall with barely more than a few scratches. If you got that kind of luck, dear, there's no reason not to test it out. See if you can get yourself a piece of that 300 million. This nurse is right, because at this point, I am convinced that Annie Lee is like a witch or some shit, with the way that everybody just immediately falls in love with her singing and like how much luck she has. Like, is she just Domino from Deadpool 2 or something? So Ethan heads back to the hotel room, and when he gets there, it's pretty easy for him to figure out that Annie Lee had been attacked, which is why she threw herself off the balcony. And he like gets super worried that somebody is going to come and get her in the hospital. So he goes back to the hospital just to find that Annie Lee is gone. Somehow he knows that she's going back home. I don't know why. I guess she just wants to finish things or whatever. Somehow he knows where she's going. And so he decides to follow her to her family home. Except he doesn't know where her family home is. He only knows what county she grew up in. So he buys a car, drives all the way to this county, and then like some fucking creeper goes around to different bars showing a picture of Annie Lee, being like, hey, do you know this girl? Do you know where she lives? And for some reason, a waitress recognizes Annie Lee and like tells Ethan where her family home is, which is like, I don't know why she does this. Like, girl solidarity. If a creepy guy comes around like showing a picture of somebody who you know, being like, hey, do you know where this girl, you don't say shit. You have never seen that girl in your life. It doesn't matter if you grew up next door to her. You have never met that bitch. But this waitress tells Ethan where Annie Lee's family home is. But not just that, he tells her, oh, that girl, her name isn't Annie Lee. Her real name is Rose McCord. Oh, yeah. All of a sudden, the title of this book, Run, Rose, Run, is starting to make sense, isn't it? So Ethan, with all of his amazing military prowess, decides that the best next course of action is to drive to Annie Lee's family home, walk up on the front porch, knock on the door, and ask the abusive stepfather if Annie Lee is there. Dude, are you stupid? If you just blew her cover. He now knows that she is coming. He now know. Do you want her to die? Like, what is wrong? I thought you were supposed to be this super amazing military guy, and yet you're immediately telling her abusive stepdad that she is intending to come home and do what, I don't know, whatever it is that she's doing. Like, why would you do that's the stupidest idea ever. Do you think that he was, if she was there, that he was just going to tell the truth and be like, oh yeah, she's hanging out in my living? No. What was the point of this? Anyway, somehow Ethan ends up talking to the older of the half sisters, and she tells Ethan that if Rose or Annie Lee has come back, then Annie Lee has probably gone to see her husband. Ooh, secret husband. So again, using his incredible military tactical skills, Ethan heads out to Gus's cabin and beats up Gus and this other man, Rick, who happens to be there, and finds Annie Lee like beaten up and tied up in the basement and saves her. Wow. And when we are in the police station a couple hours later, Annie Lee like finally tells us what her entire backstory is. And are you ready for it? Because guess what? It's gonna ruin the entire story, basically. Also, trigger warning, there is a mention of, some stuff. So Annie Lee's whole entire thing is that she and Gus were high school sweethearts or whatever. And so eventually they got married because Annie Lee, grew up in this abusive household. She didn't really want to be there anymore. She wanted to escape. So she married Gus so she could get away from it. But eventually Gus is like, oh, I'm a man. I provide all this stuff for you and you don't provide anything. So you need to earn your keep by I'm selling you into adult work, if you know what I mean. I'm trying to keep it friendly for YouTube, Annie Lee was forced into a ring, and not the circus kind, if you know what I mean. Let's say she was kidnapped. And her kidnappers, brought her around to different hotel rooms and made her do circus tricks and perform activities. And so eventually she was able to escape her kidnappers. And that is when she headed off to Nashville and met Ruth Anna and Ethan. And this reveal just ruins the entire, but makes no sense because let's talk about it and like what this means for the story. So like let's say that Annie Lee did escape. I mean, she did. I'm not questioning her. This definitely happened. Annie Lee escaped her kidnappers, right? Why would your number one concern after escaping your kidnappers be to then go to Nashville and become a big name country music star? Wouldn't you want to stay hidden so that your kidnappers can't find you? Like, I know that that is a huge thing for victims that they talk about, is that they need to stay hidden and make all of this effort to stay hidden so that they are not found and then again kidnapped or have bad things happen to them. Of course, my battery light is flashing. All right, give me a little while and I'll come back. All right, we are back. I apologize for any disorienting lighting changes there might have been, but I figured that since we are so close to the end, let's just get this done, get it over with. So, what we're talking about? Oh, right, the implications of Annie Lee having been kidnapped. So, Annie Lee escaped from her kidnapper, and first thing that she's concerned about is going and becoming a big name country music star. What? How does that work? If you just escape such a dangerous situation, you want to make it so that your kidnappers don't find you and kidnap or kill you, wouldn't you be doing your best to stay hidden and keeping your identity secret, or at least have her make an effort into like really changing her appearance? Annie Lee like never dyes her hair. She doesn't wear makeup. She doesn't do like any hardcore style changes. She doesn't tan. She doesn't do anything to try and make it so that there's no scene where like they want her to have an Instagram or something and she like freaks out and is like, no, I don't want my images like anywhere, like I want to be faceless, like Orville, whoever, they put a picture up here. She doesn't try and do anything to try and like cover her face and make it so that her kidnappers don't find her. Wouldn't that be like a big concern? And wouldn't that be something that would be kind of suspicious, that would like pique the interest of like Ethan and Ruth Ann, that she wants to be this big name country musician, yet at the same time she also doesn't want anybody to know who she is? Like, no, we get none of that. And let's say that your kidnappers then did find you, because they did several times. Annie Lee's kidnappers show up and beat her up. Why did they do that? If you've been kidnapped and your kidnappers find you, would they not either kidnap you again and put you back into the situation where you originally were, or kill you for leaving that situation? Like, I don't understand why they're beating her up and then leaving her there. What lesson is Annie Lee supposed to be learned? Or do they want her to voluntarily come back to the situation? This makes no sense. I don't understand. What is the point of the harassing Annie Lee as opposed to actually just kidnapping her? Again, I don't understand. She also never ever acts as though this is something that she has gone through. Annie Lee has zero trauma response to apparently this extremely traumatic situation that she went through. She's way too confident for somebody who has just left the situation. Like, thinking back to all of the interactions that she's had with the men in this book, it just doesn't make any sense. She's like in that scene with that guy who said that she had to sleep with him before he would play her song. Like, she is so confident when he is like asserting himself sexually onto her, and it's so weird that she is just able to have this confidence even though she's just come out of this incredibly tough situation. Like, why did we not have any sort of trauma response from this, if this is something she's actually gone through. Like, she has absolutely no trauma response to anything whatsoever. And that could have made for good conflict and good character building, and could have made it so that, say, that when she was going on tour with her and Ethan, like maybe Ethan wakes up in the middle of the night and finds her bed empty and is like super concerned, thinking that Annie Lee has been kidnapped or something. But it turns out she's just sleeping in the car because she's so scared of hotel rooms she can't even exist in one. And then they could have had a cute bonding moment. Maybe they go and like buy an RV or something to travel around her touring area in. That would have been cute. Like, those would have been like real conflict, real stuff going on, as opposed to Annie Lee just getting everything handed to her and stuff like that. I wish that we had gotten that instead of the crap that we got for the past 400 pages. Anyway, that is pretty much the end of the book, except we do get this little like 9 month later epilogue where everything is working out perfectly fine for Annie Lee. She and Ruth Anna are at the CMAs and they're performing for millions of people. So everything has just worked out perfectly for Annie Lee. Wow, who could have guessed? Nothing in this book went her way ever. So like, wow, I am so surprised that is so successful and made it so far. I'm being sarcastic in case you can't tell. I hope that you can. All right, great job, everybody. If you happened to make it to the end of this video, give yourself a round of applause, because damn, this was a journey that we went through. I don't really know what I expected from this book, but I did kind of expect more than what we got, especially since this book came from two really big name people like Dolly Parton and James Patterson. Like, I know that at this point James Patterson is kind of turned into a content farm more than an author, but still, as somebody who has so many like best-selling New York Times books or whatever, I do expect a little bit more when it comes to characters and plot, and at least having it be concise enough that it feels like the editor read through your book and it feels like one whole piece, as opposed to stuff being literally cut out. I mean, I don't know, are my standards like too, I don't think my standards are too high for somebody who has, how many, let's see, how many books has James Patterson published? Oh, over 114? And he's 76. Holy crap. Okay, if he started publishing when he was 18, that would be a book every 6 months. No wonder they are so bad. Holy crap. Anyway, that's kind of it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you were able to get here, make sure to leave your comments below about this book. Did you like this book? Did you not like this book? Is this the first time that you are encountering this book? Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of this video. If you want more videos like this, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, blah, 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 obligatory YouTube outro. But besides that, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Bye.